Hello everybody, this is Linda and welcome back to my channel. Today we will do a brief analysis of the Disney movie Encanto and what it can teach us about family roles. If you are new to this channel, welcome. Here we talk about how to apply spiritual and personal development concepts in a practical way to live a more meaningful and fulfilling life. And if you find this content helpful, please like, comment, share, and subscribe. Now, the reason why I wanted to talk about this subject is because I think it is really helpful to learn about it, because people's behaviors become easier to understand when we view them in the context of the family relationship and the roles that they played, or in a lot of cases are still playing in their family dynamics. And obviously it also applies to us. It is easier for us to gain a sense of awareness and learn and understand our own motivations as we start understanding the roles we played and or are still playing in our family dynamics. So the first thing that I want to say is that I really like the movie. It is a great movie. I love the music because I love Lynn. And for those of you who have seen some other of my videos, you know that I am from Puerto Rico. So I absolutely fully support Lynn Manuel. And I thought the music was great. And I also want to say that I think Disney did a really, really great job. I mean, this is not a review, but I do want to say that. I mean, the animation was great, the music was great, and it was actually quite interesting that the topic that it tackled is a really mature topic. And I've noticed over the last few years, Disney has been sort of venturing or dipping their toes into more mature subjects in animated movies, which actually I think can be really helpful for children, because they start through, in a subconscious way, they start understanding some of these things that a lot of us only found out about in adulthood. Like, for example, the fact that in families there is a lot of different roles that different family members may play. So having said all of that, this is not a review. I do want to analyze the movie from the perspective of, a life coach and a healer, and how I see these things play out in real life. Now, what I do want to mention is that a lot of people attribute these types of family dynamics and family roles with narcissistic parents or parental figures, depending on the case of the person. But I want to be clear that these patterns are not exclusive to those types of relationships. They're not exclusive only to narcissistic parents or parents with borderline personality disorder, etc. These types of roles and family dynamics are actually often present in most families. They're just present there to varying degrees. So in the movie, like in families, you will find that there are a variety of roles that different family members may play. Obviously, there's the parent or the parental figures or figure. There's also other roles, like, for example, the golden child, which can also be called the hero. There is the scapegoat, which is often, can be known, as a troublemaker, or the black sheep, I think is a more common name that we use in our daily lives. There is also other roles like the mediator, the protector, etc. Now, what happens a lot of the times is that often parents project their good qualities or their expectations into the golden child, and their negative emotions, their negative thoughts, experiences, memories, or even behaviors that they are afraid of and have suppressed or repressed into the scapegoat, or what is considered as, the trouble child. Now, this actually explains why in the movie Abuela mistreated Mirabel, but also why she pushed Isabella so much. Because as some other reviewers that I have seen have pointed out, she saw herself in Isabella and wanted to, albeit subconsciously, live through her the life that she wanted for herself and unfortunately lost. Now, there's a variety of roles that I saw in the movie, but in order to keep this video short, I am going to focus on the two that jumped out the most because they are two of the main characters of the movie, but they're also the ones that we really, I think, are fleshed out the most. And those two characters are the character of Isabella as the golden child and Mirabel as the scapegoat. Now, I want to be clear that in real life dynamics, right, both of these roles are incredibly complex. And contrary to popular belief, one can be just as damaging as the other. People just assume that the golden child always has it easy, but that is actually not the case at all. They are really expected to perform according to the wants and needs or expectations of the family. In this case, you saw that with Abuela and Isabel, where Isabel, sorry, I just went into Spanish there for a moment, but Isabel was, expected to marry a certain person and behave a certain way and present a certain way. And that can actually be really damaging to the golden child, albeit to most of us, we don't perceive it that way. Now, and this happens often at the expense of their own desires for their own life, as you saw in the movie. Now, they are under constant pressure and often grow up feeling like they have to be perfect so that others love them or see value in them. Now, obviously, this is a Disney movie, so they do not get so deep into the consequences of these dynamics and the consequences that they have in the adult lives of these characters, right? But in real life, one common symptom of this dynamic is, as you might expect, perfectionism, right? So people who want to do things perfectly, or more than want, but feel the need to do things perfectly all the time. Now, don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with taking pride in what you do and ensuring that is of great quality, right? But perfectionism is very different. It looks more like, sleepless nights, people riddled with anxiety, agonizing over every little detail in a project, or maybe constantly worrying about what others may think of you, or worse, that others may think less of you if you make a mistake. And if you are someone who's somewhat of a perfectionist, you know those things to be true and you understand how corrosive that can be to in your daily life and to your own psyche, right? I mean, it could be very, and I say that as a recovering perfectionist, right? These are people that are incredibly self-critical and usually have a lot of anxiety in their lives. And oftentimes they have depression as well. Now, they are really concerned with keeping up the appearance that they lose, or so concerned with it, I should say, that they lose touch with their own wants and needs, which in turn would make it nearly impossible for them to find fulfillment in life, because how can you be happy if you don't know what makes you happy, right? So it is a really complicated dynamic, and I wanted to talk a little bit about that because it is something that a lot of people miss. When we see the golden child, we often think of them as like the favorite, right? Like they're the favorite, nothing they do is wrong, they have the perfect life. But what happens is that may be what we perceive, but internally what is happening for them, oftentimes subconscious and unbeknownst to them, can also be just as damaging as the dynamic and the experience that the scapegoat or the troubled child has. Now, Mirabel's role is clearly the scapegoat, right? Now, the scapegoat is a very interesting role in family dynamics because a lot of family problems are put on or projected into this person. Now, they can become, I don't know what the right word is, I guess I'll say the trash bin, if you will, right? For the things that the family doesn't want to address. So, in a sense, the scapegoat can be considered a rebel, right? Because they see and can oftentimes even reflect or actually sometimes call out the problems that everyone in the family is either blind to or pretending not to see, right? Which, in my opinion, is more often than not the latter. But there's also a lot of truth in the fact that sometimes our own trauma and our own wounds and our own even defense mechanisms prevent us from seeing things that are really right in front of our faces. Now, the irony of the scapegoat, the irony of this situation is that just like in Encanto, this is their gift, that they can see through the facade at the cracks that are spreading everywhere, right? So, like the cracks that were spreading all over the casita, she was the one, others knew it, but they knew it because of what Bruno has said. She's the one who could see it. That is something that is very common to scapegoats, and oftentimes is the reason, or not the exclusive reason, but one of the biggest reasons why they become the scapegoat, right? Because they're calling out things that others do not want to see. Whether they don't see it because they choose not to or because they can't, the point is that calling that out creates a lot of discomfort, right? Furthermore, what actually even compounds the problem and the trauma for these people in real life situations is that others usually subconsciously punish them for that. They are punished for seeing what they see and for naming it or identifying it. And they often have a way of sort of expressing, even if it's not directly, they have a way of seeing and expressing that the dynamics are not healthy. And a lot of times that manifests in their behavior, right? The behavior that people consider problematic, the behavior that people consider troublesome, right? That is a sign, and that is a way, albeit covert, where the scapegoat is manifesting and showing the cracks in the casita, right? The problems in the dynamic of the family. Now, the issue for scapegoats is that they actually internalize a lot of these harmful messages and learn to believe that there is something wrong with them, that they are different or that they don't belong. And in households where there's a lot of violence, they actually also often take the brunt of the abuse. And we see this right in the movie where Abuela is constantly picking on Mirabel, but also that she has a sense, even though I don't think it's explicitly said in the movie that she doesn't feel like she belongs to the family or with the family, you see it often. One of the most egregious, and I use that word actually consciously because I just thought it was just incredibly painful to watch, when the whole family took that picture, right? And she wasn't part of the picture and nobody noticed that. So that was, I mean, as I'm saying, and I'm like having a reaction, that was incredibly, incredibly painful for me to watch, even though I know this is an animated movie and is technically a cartoon. It was just really hard to watch because I could feel her pain. And that is a constant reinforced message that scapegoats get in the family. Now, I'd say like there's a lot of different real life adult scenarios where you can spot these types of dynamics, be it the scapegoat, the peacemaker, the golden child, whomever. But when we're talking about the scapegoat, two particular adult scenarios that I've noticed is one, people who are what others may deem oppositional, right? People that are very rebellious, they do not conform and they refuse to toe the line. And I'm like literally calling myself out in this, right? But as opposed to the golden child who oftentimes sacrifices their own authenticity or their own wants and needs for the sake of connection, scapegoats on this side of the fence, right? The ones that fall into the oppositional category oftentimes choose authenticity over complying for acceptance and connection, right? So in Mirabel's case, I mean, it's kind of like a little fussy, but one of the areas where you could see it is even though she was constantly trying to get abuelas, okay, I'm sorry, I said that in like three different languages, abuela's approval, she was also doing things directly against abuela's express wishes, right? Like, for example, digging into Bruno's story, for example. Now, another way that this can manifest, that the scapegoat role can manifest in adult life or in real life scenarios is through the use of substances or ways to dissociate or disconnect from the painful reality that they see, but are often forced, directly or indirectly, to deny or keep quiet about. One of the reasons, in my opinion, is because the cognitive dissonance is too painful to bear, is too painful to carry. They see something, they know something, and they are not allowed to express it. If they do, right, they get punished, and they get disconnection, right? They lose connection, they are ostracized. And if they don't, they have to hold that truth, that painful truth, and they are then scapegoated, right? They are blamed for it. So no matter what they do, in either case, the consequences are pretty dire. Now, one thing I noticed in the movie that I haven't heard anybody mention before, and I haven't seen anybody analyzing it, I've seen a few reviews, YouTube reviews about the movie. So, but one of the things that I haven't seen anybody mention is that from what I noticed, and this is my opinion, and of course, this is an animated movie, so, but my opinion from what I noticed, it seems like Bruno was the original scapegoat of the family, right? Because he was doing this predictions and, foreshadowing, and then he was being blamed for the actual actions, even in even at times when people asked him, right, to see what he saw for their future, if what he said was something they didn't like, he got blamed, and I think he, clarifies that. But he seems or appears to me to have been the original scapegoat. Now, when he quote unquote disappeared, right, they needed to find another scapegoat. Now, this is also true in real life family dynamics. And that's because the family that refuses or cannot see their real issues always needs someone to project them into or onto, I think is the right term to use there, right? The last thing I would say that is really important to note is that these roles are not static. They can change and they can rotate. Or if you are, like, say, for example, an only child, you may play two or more of these roles within your own family, sometimes even at the same time. Or you can be the golden child one day and the scapegoat the next. Now, I do want to take a few seconds here, or maybe minutes, I guess, to talk about Abuela. And I am going to say this, I found the Abuela character really painful to witness. And I'll be very honest and say that I was even a little triggered, because I really, really took it personal and had to pause actually and gather myself several times as I was watching the bits and pieces about not just throughout the movie, but especially towards the end, because I actually share a similar wound than Mirabel does. And even Abuela's apology at the end didn't make me feel any better. Now, the reason why I say that is because, I'm a healer and I'm a life coach. So I do this work for a living, and I came to this work as a result of my own journey, right? I didn't just decide one day that I wanted to do this. I've actually been working on myself and my own wounds for over a decade. And I do also understand, and it is part of my practice that, subconscious wounds have a real effect on how you behave and how you relate to others, right? So when talking about the movie, I understand that the subconscious wounds, or in some cases the very conscious wounds of abuela's trauma, drove her to create a personality that was really hardened as a way to protect herself and her family from further pain. The funny thing about that protective barrier is that it actually oftentimes lead us to create the very thing we're trying to avoid, right? So in the case of Abuela, her stern and really, in my opinion, very unkind demeanor, especially towards Mirabel, was deep down intended to keep her and her family safe from, future pain, but it in fact created the very circumstances for the crack of the foundation of the casita. What I found difficult to digest is that in the movie, and again, this is a Disney movie at the end of the day, right? So they're not going to dive too deep into all of these wounding and painful dynamics. But at the end, I felt like the apology to Mirabel was sort of very surfacey, right? The fact that someone has severe wounding and trauma helps us understand and helps us have empathy and compassion for them, but does not excuse their behavior. In this case, it does not excuse Abuela's behavior toward Mirabel. It explains it, but it doesn't excuse it. And I just found that painful because I do think is very common in a lot of families, especially in certain cultures, mine included, where loyalty to family, right, in maintaining the family is put above all else. Even the very real and present pain of some of the family members, right? So I don't know if any of you who are listening to me have heard in the family, have felt really wounded by something that happened in your family dynamic, and have heard the phrase, well, you need to forgive because that's your mother or that's your father, or you need to get over it, or this is your family, so we don't talk about the family problems outside of the family, or don't complain about the family because that's disloyal and you shouldn't do that. They love you. All of these things, right? And I think that is a very, very damaging thing because it actually compounds the pain and the trauma that that person is experiencing, because not only do they have that wound, but they are also being told that they are not allowed, or it's not okay for them to express the impact that that wound had on them, or even have any sort of quote unquote negative emotion, right? Feel any anger or any resentment toward the very people that inflicted that wound. And that is incredibly invalidating and actually compounds those wounds. So I really feel, I did love the movie. I do feel like at the end of it, I was a little, I don't know, I had a lot of energy around it. And again, because it does have a lot of resemblance to my own life experience and the life experience of a lot of people that I know. And I just found it wasn't sufficient for me. Now, it wasn't sufficient from the perspective of someone who has those real life experiences, but as a movie, it was amazing. So, how is this helpful to your day to day life? Well, by looking at your family dynamics, it will really help you to gain clarity of what role you play, or again, are still playing. And once you know that, you can then look at how that role is playing out in other relationships in your life, right? So, for example, if you are the golden child in your family, do you also, or were the golden child in your family, whatever the case may be, do you also play that or a very similar role in your romantic relationships, in your professional relationships, in your other social type of relationships, right? that can really help you understand that your reactions to people may actually be based on you perceiving interactions through the filter of your own trauma, through the filter of the trauma and the wounding that you received and was perpetuated by that role that you played in your unhealthy family dynamic. And it could also help you have a lot of compassion for others, because when you understand that some of people's behaviors that actually impact you negatively are childhood patterns showing up in present day life, you can have a little bit more compassion and empathy, and also maybe even help them notice that in a non invasive way, of course, but help them notice that. And also, it's a piece of information that you have when you're trying to heal dynamics and solve problems in your current life and relationships. I thought it was great. I thought it was a great subject to tackle. I know that it was somewhat surfacey, but, or a lot surfacey, I should say, but it's also a Disney movie, right? And similar to other like Pixar movies and things like that, that I've seen, obviously they cannot dive too deep. And also, children are also probably going to be watching this. So they have to be very careful how they present it. But overall, I thought it was a great movie, and I am actually really glad that I'm seeing a lot of movies, especially Disney, movies that are made for children, tackling a lot of these subjects, because it allows children to grow up having already seen or experienced some, or gaining some understanding for these types of dynamics. Now, obviously, a child is not going to get this fully. They're not going to understand all of the ins and outs of what happened or what we just discussed, but they have some exposure to it. So as they grow older and they hear these terms, or maybe find themselves in these types of dynamics, they can possibly relate it back to these characters and have more information and be better equipped to deal with the repercussions of the wounding, a lot more so than people probably in my generation did. So this is really why I wanted to talk about it. I hope that this was helpful to you. And until next time, namaste.